So good morning, ma'am. Today we will be discussing about our insight with regards to the post-harvest food losses, the neglected dimension in increasing the world food supply. So, most international donor organizations have identified the food supply and nutritional status of population in developing countries as a major problem areas and consequently have expended considerable effort in the fields of agriculture and nutrition. The bulk of this effort has been concentrated on increasing agricultural production and decreasing food losses in order to produce more foods. However, increasing agricultural production is not sufficient to improve the nutritional status of poor populations. The increased production must pass safely along the chain that links the farmer to the ultimate consumer, and this chain is fraught with the perils for the food. Large quantities of a food that leaves the farm never reach the consumer. Concomitant with the increased effort in food production, there should be increased effort expended in caring for that food so that it reaches the ultimate consumer. This requires a knowledge of food science and technology, storage, engineering, entomology, and biology. Also, based on the attached paper that was posted, is that it outlines the nature of the problem of post-harvest food losses, discuss the causes of loss, what is known of the extent of losses and where losses occur. Also, it describes briefly the available techniques for preserving food and identities, those techniques that offer the greatest promises for increasing the available food supply in developing countries. So, introduction. A food supply chain or food system refers to the process that describe how food from a farm ends up on our table. So, the process includes the production, processing, distribution, consumption, and disposal. So, the inadequate supply of food in developing countries has long been recognized as one of the most major problems that needs attention in the third world because, as you can see, a population that is not well fed is prone to deficiency diseases, more susceptible to infectious diseases, and those not have the energy to work hard. So the problems that result from an inadequate food supply give rise to greatly increased morbidity and mortality rates among the populations of developing countries. So both multilateral and bilateral organizations have recognized these problems and have devoted a large proportion of their aid effort to increasing the production of food. So it has been recognized that there are three main avenues by means of which the supply of food chain can be increased. So the first one is the increase the area of production. This includes such activities as clearing and developing new land, introduction and extension of irrigation system, and others. The second one is to increase the yield of crops harvested per unit of area. This includes the activities such as the development of new high-yielding varieties, more extensive use of fertilizer, breeding plants and animals that are resistant to diseases, and endeavoring to control field losses resulting from insect, rats, and rodents. And the last one is to produce more crops per year. Multiple cropping system in which several crops per annum are harvested are activities that fall in this category. So, donor organizations have used all three avenues to increase food production, but the real goal is to put more food into the mouths of the people. This requires taking raw agricultural product from the field and transporting it to the table. However, there are many opportunities for food to be lost in the pipeline that takes the food from the farm to the table. So post-harvest preservation and storage of foods are important. Also, the most important details are the post-harvest food losses must be reduced, and that the U.S. Secretary of State Dr. Henry Kissinger highlighted this issue at the World Food Conference in 1974. Better methods of safe storage and pest control must be thought and spread, and investment in these areas could have a rapid impact of the world's food supply. Additionally, reducing the wastage of food in the post-harvest chain can have many benefits such as nutrition, economic loss, and a feedback incentive for farmers to increase production. Reducing post-harvest losses would provide a more incentive for farmers to increase their production. So, what is post-harvest food losses? So, it is critical to understand exactly what is meant by post-harvest food loss. If we are to pay attention to this issue and spend significantly more resources and effort to it. So, the definition of this phrase is it currently stand is given below. So, the definition is broken up into three sections for the convenience sake. So, post-harvest means after separation from the medium and site of immediate growth or the production of the food. So basically, it is the process of collecting or separating food of edible quality from its source and ends when the food enters the mouth. So there are three periods, and these three periods of time may be identified during which food may be lost, and each period has its characteristic problems and means of overcoming these problems. So the first one is the pre-harvest, are losses that occur before the process of harvesting begins. For example, losses in growing a crop due to insect, weeds, and rust. Then the second one is harvest. Harvest losses occur between the onset and the completion of the process of harvesting. For example, losses due to shattering during harvest of the grain. And the third one, which is the post-harvest losses, occur between the completion of harvest and the moment of consumption. So, harvest and post-harvest losses are sometimes combined into a single loss because there are some elements of common concern between them. So, a suitable descriptive term for these combined activities would be post-production losses. So loss means any change in the availability, edibility, wholesomeness, or quality of the food that prevents it from being consumed by people. So food losses may be direct or indirect. So when we say a direct loss, it is the disappearance of food by spillage or consumption by rodents or birds. An indirect loss in the lowering of quality to the point where people refuse to eat it. Also, the term food refers to the items that people typically eat and exclude items that they do not typically consume. If the food is eaten by people, it is not considered as loss. If it is not eaten by people for any reason, it is regarded as a post-production food loss.
Nature of the problem. In a given region, the daily demand for food is consistent throughout the year, regardless of population changes. Yet the region's food supply varies greatly from the day to day throughout the year. The three main methods for moving and preserving food are methods used by mankind to attempt to balance an extremely unbalanced daily supply of food with an equal daily demand for food. One of the timeless historical challenges that humanity has faced is how to balance an uneven food supply with an equal demand of food. All foods that are kept in storage go through degenerative changes that reduce their flavor, color, texture, or nutritional value. There is currently no known way to stop these deteriorating alterations. This is fundamental truth that underlies all actions taken to preserve food. Food technology for preservation can sluggish the rate of quality decline but cannot reverse it. No matter how carefully a food is stored, it will ultimately become unfit for human consumption. A significant amount of time has been stored. But from practical standpoint, we are aware that some processed goods along with some cereals and some dried foods, can be stored and kept in good condition for if they have been properly conserved and stored in suitable environment for a number of years. The developing countries have a number of problems in their battle to reduce post-harvest food losses that are not found in the developed temperate climate countries. First is they have insufficient knowledgeable personnel with the expertise to preserve and protect food. They have insufficient capital to provide the necessary handling and storage equipment for food. They have insufficient purchasing power to pay for the cost proper protection. They have climatic conditions that favor the growth of insects, rodents, and molds that accelerate the normal deteriorative changes that occurs in stored foods. In some countries, there is fatalistic altitude that severe losses in stored foods are inevitable and nothing can be done about it. Causes of losses. There are numerous factors that contribute to post-harvest food losses, and they can be divided into primary and secondary causes. For each reason, examples of loss are shown. In primary causes, we have biological and microbiological, chemical and biochemical, mechanical, physical, physiological, and psychological. Some of these causes of losses interact. For example, respiration generates heat, which, if not dissipate, will accelerate biochemicals and chemical changes. If the temperature continues to rise, the point is reached in stored grains, where insects infecting the food move away from hot spot or are killed. In extreme cases, the temperature can rise to the point where the food begins to blacken and eventually burn. In some cases, more than one of these causes may be responsible for food loss. Multiple causes may work simultaneously or sequentially. Simultaneous action is the growth of mold and insects at the same time. Secondary causes are those that can result in circumstances where the primary cause of loss can happen. They frequently occur as a result of poor or absent input. For example, is inadequate drying equipment or poor drying season, inadequate storage facilities to protect the food from insect, rodent, bird, rain, and high humidity, inadequate transportation to get the food to market before it spoils, inadequate refrigerated or cold storage for perishables, inadequate marketing systems, legislation. The presence or absence of legal standards can affect the eventual retention or rejection of food for human use. So primary causes can be used to offset secondary causes such as drying grain or growing longer lasting sugars. So where losses occur. Losses may occur anytime, anywhere from the point where the food has been harvested or gathered up to the point of consumption. For the sake of convenience, the losses can be broken down into the following subheadings. First is preparation. This is the preliminary separation or extraction of edible from non-edible animal and agricultural production. Second is preservation. It is the prevention of loss and spoilage of foods. Third is processing. It is the conversion of edible food into another form more acceptable or more convenient to the consumer. Next is storage. It is the holding of foods until consumption. Transportation. Most developing countries need an improved transportation system to reduce the time lag between the site of production and the market. And last one is the home preparation. In developed countries, there is considerable loss of food in the home.
How much food is wasted overall in the food chain after harvest is a crucial subject. The truthful response to this query is that nobody truly is aware. We are aware that sources vary greatly depending on the commodity under consideration, the nation, and the circumstances, the manner in which the food is handled. The period of time the food is stored, we would anticipate that first of all, food losses would be higher than in staple food, and that loss severity will grow over time of space. Individual losses ranging from zero can be found, yet the main concern is the loss that average out to 100% figure, and there is no absolute knowledge of this. Damage caused by ravens and birds has also been quite insignificant during recent years in Australia. The nature of the storage structures and the practice of handling with exclusively in are key factors that have minimized these potential hazards. So another way in which the percent of loose can be unwetling and exaggerated is found in the case of the subsistence farmer who harvests one crop a year and store it for personal uses. If the grain is properly dried, most of his losses will come from insect infestations and perhaps rodents. During the first few months of storage, the percent of loose is low, but as the storage time continues, the number of insects increases exponentially until just before the next harvest season, there can be a very high percentage loss. But this high percentage of loss at the end of the storage period is applied to a very small quantity of the year's supply of grain, and the overall amount of loss is considerable less than it would appear to be from looking at the farmer's stored grain shortly before the next harvest. This section briefly reviews the methods available for preserving foods and reducing losses. It identifies those methods that should have a high priority in reducing food losses and those methods that are unlikely to make any substantial contribution to loss reductions in developing countries. Here is some of the methods. First is drying. Drying is the most important food preservation technique in both developed and developing countries, as it reduces the moistures and content of food, but does not prevent the growth of insect and higher forms of life. Another method is packaging and protective storage. Packaging and protective storage is dried food need to be kept dry by protecting them from water and water vapor. Physically protections from insects, rodents, and birds, and effective retail packaging. Existing knowledge is needed to be applied on a wider scale and at a lower cost. The third is refrigerations and cooling. Refrigerations and cooling are of particular interest for extending the storage life of perishable foods. Another method is chemicals. Chemicals is for fumigants, insecticides, and rodenticides have a well-established place in controlling insects and rodents in grain storage system. The technology of the technology of applying these has been well developed. Another method is fermentation. Some fermentations that are occur spontaneously in foods, notably the alcohol and lactic acid fermentations, develop a natural preservative as a product of the fermentation. Also another method is canning. Thermal sterilizations of food in cans or bottle is expensive, disqualifying it for large-scale preservation. And another method also is irradiation. Irradiation promise convenient low-cost methods of food preservation that would be a great use in developing countries. Also, another method is freezing and freeze drying. These two techniques give excellent quality in preserved foods, but the equipment is expensive, sophisticated, and has a high energy equipment. This puts them beyond the reach of low income populations. Pasteurization is another method also. It extends the shelf life of milk and other foods, but it requires sophisticated equipment. On these grounds, it is unsuited for most low-income populations. Sterilized filtrations is another method also. It is some other advanced techniques are being studied in developing countries, but their high level of sophistication and high cost make them unsuited for consideration for preserving food for low income population at the present time.
Needed actions. This section can be subdivided into two parts. A. The commodities that should be given attention in post-harvest food loss reduction programs, and B. The activities that should be given considerations. Commodities. Post-harvest food loss reduction efforts should focus on grains and dry legumes, but roots and tubers should also be considered. Roots and tubers provide a large proportion of the calorie intake in many developing countries and should be given some attention in any post-harvest food loss reduction program. Perishable foods have traditionally been neglected in post-harvest food loss reduction activities due to their perishability, transportation, and marketing. There are dozens of perishable foods with a wide variety of types, chemical and nutrient composition, spoilage, and methods of preserving and maintaining quality. Deficiencies in minor nutrients can sap vigor and increase morbidity and mortality rates. Also, select a limited number of perishable foods to help overcome deficiencies of minor nutrients in developing countries, reducing the problem of manageable levels. Activities. A wide range of activities is needed in any comprehensive program of post-harvest food loss reduction activity. The following activities are listed in decreasing order of the level of funding that should be applied to each one. Education. It is significant that methods for controlling post-harvest food losses are well known and widely used in developed countries but not in developing countries. Therefore, a major educational effort across the whole spectrum of society in developing countries is needed in order to make their populations aware of the fact that large post-harvest losses in foods are not inevitable, that there are known causes for losses and known cures for each cause of loss. Adaptive research. Although the basic knowledge of food preservation and storage is well known and technology is well developed in developed countries, there is a need to develop packages of low-cost, simple technology that will fit right into the existing practices and customs of each country. Basic research. There is a need for basic research in a limited number of areas in order to develop new technologies for special problems of developing countries. Loss surveys. Since little hard data are available on the extent of losses, the economic dimensions of the losses and cost of reducing losses, it is desirable to have in-country surveys to determine typical figures. This kind of data is a need prerequisite to the planning of effective large-scale intervention programs. Literature research. In the early days of the country, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and state experiment stations gave much attention to the problem of food spoilage on the farm. Simple practical ways whereby farm families could reduce their food losses were developed and brought to the attention of farmers through the extension services.
The U.S. Secretary of State Dr. Kissinger proposed at the World Food Conference held in Rome in 1974 that a world food reserve of approximately million tons of green be established to carry the developing countries of the world through critical times of food shortage in future years. The details of this proposal are still being worked out. But it seems that at least some of these long-term storages will be held in the developing countries. One technical aspect of this World Food Reserve Program that has been given insufficient attention the ability to store cereals for periods of many years under tropical conditions. World Food Reserve refer to quantity of food that is stored in various countries around the world as a buffer against potential food storages or emergency. These reserves can include grains such as rice and maize as well as another food. The purpose of these reserves is to ensure that in the event of food crisis, there is a supply of food available to meet the needs of the affected population. This is particularly important in developing countries where food insecurity is a persistent problem. The management and distribution of food service are typically the responsibility of government agencies such as a U.S. Department of Agriculture.